Okay, so this is the Bible study for First John, chapter 3, verses 11 through 24. And the text for today says, "For this is the message you heard from the beginning. We should love one another. Do not be like Cain, who belonged to the evil one and murdered his brother. And why did he murder him? Because his own actions were evil and his brothers were righteous. Do not be surprised, my brothers and sisters, if the world hates you. We know that we have passed from death to life because we love each other. Anyone who does not love remains in death. Anyone who hates a brother or sister is a murderer. And you know that no murderer has eternal life residing in him. This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need and has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. This is how we know that we belong to the truth and how we set our hearts at rest in his presence. If our heart condemns us, we know that God is greater than our hearts and he knows everything. Dear friends, if our hearts do not condemn us, we may have confidence before God and receive from him anything we ask, because we keep his commands and do what pleases him. And this is his command, to believe in the name of his son, Jesus Christ, and to love one another as he commanded us. The one who keeps God's commands lives in him, and he in them. And this is how we know that he lives in us. We know it by the Spirit he gave us. All right, so remember that you can download a PDF copy of this Bible study at www.abqnaz.org/alive. And again, this is 1 John 3:11 through 24. And number 1 says, what message does John say we have heard from the beginning according to 3:11? Now, a lot of this, I'm just going to say this is not a very long book, but we are seeing repetition throughout this. He's saying the same things in different words. As we split up the text, it almost feels like we're studying the same text week after week, because there are elements of each portion of this text that were in last week's text. So we're not doing sort of a review question like a lot of times we do in a more narrative book when we're studying it. Because I don't think we need to review what it already said. It's nothing new. He's saying the same kind of thing. If we spent an entire question reviewing what was last week's, we might have half taught this Bible study already, because a lot of this is the same. He's building on a theme and saying things in a different way, sometimes summarizing what he's already said. So number 1 says, what message does John say we've heard from the beginning? He says, for this message you heard from the beginning. We should love one another. So that's not new. We've been talking about that for 3 or 4 weeks now, because that's been throughout the book of 1 John. This is the command. This has never changed. This is not a new command. It's an old command. This is how we know who the children of God are and who the children of the devil are. All of this, we see it over and over and over. Number 2, what does John say about Cain in 3:12? See also Genesis 4:1 through 16. A, he belonged to the evil one. So it says, do not be like Cain, who belonged to the evil one. And B, he murdered his brother. So yes, he belonged to the evil one and he murdered his brother. And then C says he murdered his brother because, which is the same as B, but it says because his own actions. It says, and why did he murder him? Because his own actions were evil and his brothers were righteous. So he belonged to the evil one. And this is how we know, because, and we talked about this in the previous weeks, because whether we love God or we love ourselves is sort of the definition. Do we love God and everything we do is geared towards serving God, doing his will, loving others? Or do we love ourselves and everything we love the world? So everything that we do is geared towards bringing pleasure and bringing comfort to ourselves. So in the end, Cain did what was evil, and what was evil was rather than recognizing that he was doing the wrong thing, he murdered his brother to cover it up. Now, some of this kind of seems to coincide with what we've been studying in the book of 2 Samuel as well, because in the end, isn't that what David also did, who was supposed to be a man after God's own heart, but did something that was clearly not after God's heart? And Cain did this too. He did the wrong thing. If you go back and read the Genesis 4:1-16, God says to Cain, why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be rewarded? Okay, so ultimately he gave an improper, incomplete sacrifice. He gave an offering that was not his best. He gave an offering that was not what his brother gave. And God considered his brother's actions righteous and his actions evil because he was holding back for himself. So what did he do? Instead of doing what is right, so that he will be considered righteous himself, he tore down the one that was considered righteous instead of him. And so that's sort of the epitome of selfishness and ultimately of hate rather than love. Number 3, what makes you more upset when people do evil? So sometimes people do evil, they do wrong, and that upsets us, and it should upset us. It upset Jesus, especially when that evil was taking advantage of others. Or when they do the right thing and make you look bad. So there's 2 different ways. We can get upset when other people do evil, but sometimes I've seen the greatest rage, the greatest anger come out, not when somebody did wrong, but when somebody did something right and made you look bad. And so they did the righteous thing, but that made what I did it clear that that wasn't the right thing. And so now I'm more mad about you doing what's right than I am. I mean, that's where the rage comes out. That's where the evil and the anger in our hearts comes out. Not when somebody does the wrong thing, but when they do what's right and it makes me look bad. So then the second part of this text says, okay, now tell the truth. Now tell the truth this time. Because you probably said the nice Bible study answer, and you probably said, oh, I don't like it when people do what's wrong. But the truth is, if you consider it, you don't like it when people do what's wrong, but I bet you're even more upset when somebody does what is right, and it makes it clear that you did what was wrong. Because pride is a nasty, evil thing that just takes over our lives if we're not careful, and it is the sin nature that is in charge of our lives unless we put our lives in the hands of God. Number 4 says, John 3:13 says that we should not be surprised if the world hates us. Why, according to the previous verses, would the world hate us? So Jesus says, don't be surprised if the world hates us. So I'm going to just pull that up so that I can read it and not try to quote it, although I think I'm quoting it right. Actually, I'm sorry. This should be 1 John 3:13. Well, hold on just a second. I know I have this reference correct at some point in here. But it's 1 John 3:13. It's in this text. There's also a reference in John, but it's not 3:13. Do not be surprised, my brothers and sisters, if the world hates you. So the reference is in C. Do not be surprised if the world hates you, is what it says in 1 John 3:13. Why, according to the previous verses, would the world hate us? A, because we did something wrong. B, because the world's actions are evil and ours are righteous. We make them look bad. Our very life leaves them without excuse for their own actions. Yeah, it's great to make an excuse and say, well, I can't do what is right until somebody else is doing what is right. And then how do I justify myself then? Now in C, John 15:18, this is the reference in John. If the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it hated you. If you were, and this is Revised Standard that I'm reading, if you were of the world would love its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. And that's Jesus speaking to his disciples. So we know that we're not of the world, and therefore the world hates us. We shouldn't be surprised by that. John said it in John 15:18. John said it in 1 John 3:13. We are going to be hated most, not when we do what is wrong, but when we do what is right. Positive, encouraging. I know. You love it. Number 5, how according to 3:14 do we know that we have passed from death to life? 3:14 says, and again, should be 1 John 3:14. Doesn't actually say John or 1 John there. We know that we have passed from death to, sorry, I'm confusing everybody with mixing up the references. People get confused enough as it is. I know I've been told that, and so I'm sorry. We know that we have passed from death to life because we love each other. Anyone who does not love remains in death. How do we know that we've passed from death to life? When we love each other. Because that's not the nature of people in the world. That's not the nature of people without Christ. We are selfish and we don't love one another. We tear one another down to make ourselves look good. That's the nature of people. When we start loving one another, truly loving one another, and we stop tearing others down for our own benefit, then that's when we know that something has changed in our life. What does it say about us if we still do not love? If we still are out for our selfish motives? And by the way, I see this even in the church. People acting very selfishly, caring more about their own little corner of the church, their own little ministry, than the overall good of the people of God. I see people being very selfish within the church. And here's what I know. If they're living for themselves, they have not passed from death to life. If we still do not love, if love is not a part of our regular, behavior, if the actions that demonstrate love don't if that's not in our life, if we're not demonstrating love with our actions, if we're showing selfishness and always out for what we think is good for us, then we have not passed from death to life. And unfortunately, we have people even inside the church that this is the pattern of their life. And again, number 6 says, what does 1 John, should be 1 John again, 3:15 say about anyone who hates their brother and sister? Anyone who hates a brother or sister is a murderer, and you know that no murderer has eternal life residing in him. So that's what it says. Where do you think John got this idea? And you go back to Matthew 5, and this is something that Jesus said. And so murder, 5:21, you have heard it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you, anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, someone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the court, and anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger to the fire of hell. Therefore, if you are offering a gift at the altar and remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, then come and offer your gift. I'm almost obsessive about relationship. When I realize that somebody is mad at me, I can't stand it. I hate when I know that somebody is mad at me, and I have to go try to make it right and try to fix it, which is what scripture says. The funny thing is, it's amazing how many people are okay with that. and won't let me make it right, won't let me reconcile, and are going to remain angry despite, and don't want to even be civil or to even talk. It's amazing to me. And sometimes I think, well, maybe I shouldn't be so obsessive. I can't make somebody like me. And that's true. And I'm having to come to terms with that. But at the same time, I don't want to fault on the other side, and just be okay when somebody has something against me, because if there's anything I've done, I want to make it right. Sometimes I end up making it worse, but that's certainly never my intent. Um, Number 7, how do we know what love is according to 3:16a? This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. A says Jesus Christ laid down his life for us. That's how we know. He modeled it for us. What then should we do? Should we do according to 3:16b? We ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. So it's not enough to say, yeah, he laid it down for me. That's now I know what love is. No, we're supposed to respond in kind. We're supposed to follow him in that and lay down our lives for others as well. Number 8, what does it look like according to 3:17 and 18? A, we know we love someone if we say we love them. Duh. No, that's not what it says. And so it says, if anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need and has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. See, real love is lived out and shown by our actions. So just because you say you love somebody doesn't mean you do. What are you doing? What are you showing with your actions? Um, and and people misinterpret actions. I know that, but I also know that a lot of people um, are are saying that they love people, but their actions show that they don't. They're avoiding them. They're not doing anything to help them. They're not reaching out. Um, Number 9, what is the difference between love and hate? A, hate is what Cain had that caused him to kill his brother. Yeah, he wanted to lift himself up, so he tore his brother down. That's how he did it. B, love causes us to lay down our life for our brother, not kill. So love is the opposite, where we lay down our life that our brother might be lifted up. C, hate is what we feel when we want something at the expense of others. Yes. D, love is what we show when we want what's best for others, even if it's at our expense. And so those are just sort of paired statements there, A, B, and C, D, that show the difference. It's the opposite. Number 10, how can we know that we belong to the truth according to 3:19 through 24? A, when we come into the presence of God, our hearts do not condemn us. That's what it says in verses 19 through 20. So in the presence of God, conviction happens when there's something wrong. And that's why, by the way, some people don't like to come into the presence of God, why people avoid church or people avoid certain people, is because of the conviction that God brings when they come into that presence. B, we have confidence in the presence of God. Verse 21 says, C, we keep his commands and do what pleases him. So there's fruit. D, we love one another. So there's fruit. E, if we live in him and he lives in us, and we know that by the spirit the spirit he gave us, which brings us peace. So he lives in us, and we can tell because there's a spirit living inside of us, and that spirit, rather than convicting us, brings us peace. And so I know there's a lot of people that say they have peace and sort of try to fake this. This is not an emotional thing. And some of us have become so callous, I think, to the presence of God and to the conviction of God that we have a false peace, because we're not even listening to the voice of God any longer. But there is a true peace when the Spirit of God lives inside of us, and when we come into that presence and he's living there then there's nothing that he points out that is wrong. There's peace rather than conviction about what's going on. And so that's we believe in the witness of the Spirit. That's a Wesleyan thing. And that means that we can know that we know that we know that we're in right relationship with God. Now it's dangerous because some people's confidence that they're in right relationship with God is coming from a false narrative that they've told themselves to justify everything they've done, and so that's a false peace, and that's us justifying and lying to ourselves, and so we got to be careful with that. But when the Spirit's in us, we can have peace in his presence, and our hearts don't condemn us. So what about you? Do you have that kind of peace? One way to check is also the fruit that C and D talk about. And so if you that's how you can know if your peace is a false peace, is analyze your fruit. Find somebody you trust that is in right relationship with God, and ask them what they see. And we can know the difference between a false peace and the true peace that he gives us, where there's no conviction because we're in right relationship with him.